So, welcome everybody. Welcome in April 12th, one of the last days in the last webinar of the Food Waste Prevention Week. I'm Daniela Ochoa, and I am just grateful and honored to be here with some of the coolest composters. They're hardcore. I keep learning from them all the time, and they made space here on a Saturday to share with you about this very specific topic, which is the link, or that bridge space between composting and food waste prevention from the perspective of hardware composters. So muchas gracias for you to be here, our presenters and storytellers, and anybody else that is joining as a listener and as a storyteller at the end. So welcome all. As I mentioned, there are other great events happening on Food Waste Prevention Week. Please check the website. Today is the last day of webinars, but there is at least a bunch of events tonight and tomorrow. They're all available in the website. Let me see if I can change. So here are our presenters. We have Annie Nichols from Illinois, Annie Baker, Francisco from Arizona, Francisco Niembro from Mexico. I will not stop for introductions because we just want to get to the meat of the stories, but please share some about your story and where you're coming from as you share. Julie Williamson from Maryland and Compass Crew. I am here, your humble presenter, Daniela Ochoa, and last minute special guest, Timbo Water from Terra Composters Network. Okay, so muchas gracias to all of you to be here. I know there are other hardcore composters also in the line, like our Yoda, Brenda Platt. Hello, Brenda, and hello, everybody else that is there. Thank you for inspiring this conversation, Brenda, because you put us together on that event of the cultivating community composting, or cultivating composting community. And so it was in Ohio last fall that we were inspired by this event, that propelled from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance to just continue this conversation because there was too much to talk about. So I thought with a couple of images or slides, we could do this kind of the storytelling time. I'm a big fan of the moth. So what I suggest for this to go smoothly is let's do 5 minutes of a story or an anecdote that you want to share. If it's much less than that, don't worry. We'll all chime in and start like a pop-up conversation. But if it's going more than 5 minutes, I'm going to try to give you a warning. So after 7 minutes, stop it so that we can really not be just like monologues, but a conversation. Does that sound good? And so I'll start my clock here on my little clock on the side. And without further ado, we'll start with our first presenter, which was going to be Annie. But Annie, do you want to consent to Francisco as he's in Mexico without electricity?
No. Go ahead with Annie so I can hear what she's saying, because I don't know what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, we're going to start with Annie then. And then maybe you tell us if you want to go second, okay? I think the most important thing is that even if we're recording, everybody here somos amigos, and we have deep love and mutual appreciation for our work. And so for me, that is a big gift this weekend. Thank you for making the time. And so let's start with Annie. Here we go. Annie, the floor is yours.
Awesome. It's good to see you all. I'm from Annie's Home Farm in Illinois, and we're a worm farm. So it's a crew of 3 people. It's my husband. The guy on the right is my husband, and then the guy in the middle, that's Joe. He works for us about half time on the worm farm. So collecting food waste and coffee grounds and mixing it with straw or hay. And anyway, so that's what it looks like on composting day. And then the picture on the right that's a ton of worm castings ready to sell. So next one. Yeah, so I'm struck so often with the beauty of the food that's coming out of the buckets that we collect. And some of it's just too good to feed to worms. So next slide. Yeah, so we have 2 small town grocery stores, and one of them in particular tends to send us stuff in the packages, which makes it so much easier to use. Because it hasn't been mixed in a bucket with other things. So next one.
This is an adorable photo, by the way.
Yeah, I have 3 grandkids that live close, and it's been wonderful to to do life with them and have them be part of food rescue. So I love that.
Thanks for sharing.
So this is just, you know, a cutting board of things that I brought in. I get all the things on both sides. Those are the foods that I get a lot of. So lots of citrus, a lot of fruits. And I have a little tray as I'm going through and taking stickers off and cutting stuff up. If it looks good, I put it on these trays and then bring it in the house.
Oh,
And
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. You're good. So the next one, so applesauce. I literally sometimes get at least maybe a 5-gallon bucket of apples or more per week. And so I rescue those and bring them in and wash them up. And then I cut them up, maybe next slide, cut them up and put them in a big kettle and I cook them down into applesauce. And then that I put in containers and put in my freezer. So apples are one of the things that I use a lot of, but I use all of these foods that are on the sides there. Okay, next slide.
Yum.
Lots of peppers, lots and lots of peppers. And so sometimes I wash them up and make stuffed peppers, but worms also really love peppers. So it's kind of a balancing act. I give some to them and some to me. But usually this method of washing the peppers and then chopping them up in little pieces, put them on a cookie sheet and throw them in the freezer. And then once they're frozen, I can take that out and crumble it up and put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it in my freezer. Then anytime I'm cooking, I can just grab peppers and throw it into whatever I'm making. Okay, next one. Bananas, you know, there's always a lot of bananas. And so this is my banana muffin tin. Make banana muffins with my grandkids every week. So next. And this is what I was saying earlier. The one grocery store sends a lot of things in this kind of packaging. So this was, I don't know, maybe raspberries or blueberries or something. So wasteful. One of the stories I would tell about that is one of those little stores had a whole bunch of blueberries, made buckets and buckets full of blueberries in these containers. And I rescued them and I froze them. And I ended up with 3-gallon bags of frozen blueberries. And I swear in all of those blueberries, there were like 2 moldy ones. It was amazing.
Wow.
So sometimes you really hit the gold mine. So next.
They're not cheap blueberries.
No. Also, not so much coming into summer because we grow, you know, lettuce and spinach and stuff, but through the winter, a lot of those clamshells of stuff that was produced hydroponically, like within our area, then got packaged in plastic and sent to our local stores, and then it didn't get sold. So then it got put in the compost buckets, and yeah, we ate that lettuce all winter. So next. And this is the new thing. So potatoes, I have a garden. And so in the last month or so, as I was going through any of the potatoes that were sprouting, I saved back and then I cut them up and I just planted them in the ground last week. So we'll see if I get potatoes from the potatoes that I rescued from the compost.
I'm about to do the same this weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's all. I put onions because I'm not planting any onions in my garden this year. I get so many onions on a weekly basis from the grocery stores. Just see if there's anything else that jumps off. Cauliflower's been fun. I learned to make pizza crust with cauliflower. That I recommend. That's really yummy. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've got. So thanks for letting me share.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing and for making, you know, the momentum for this webinar or this storytelling. I don't know what to call it. I think it's a fun conversation. But you really put your homework into this, sharing those slides. So yeah, you're right on time. Well, let's just open the conversation, see who here wants to resonate with what Annie shared. If you have any comments for Annie.
I have a friend who planted a whole bunch of potatoes that he rescued from the compost pile, and he could not even give away the number of potatoes that he grew. It was a very successful potato growing venture. So I hope it works out for you. That's really
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks, Julie. Me
Yeah.
too.
Potatoes are a great idea. I didn't even think of that. Because
Ah.
even if they're a little bit less appealing, you can still cut them up and plant them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because I've always purchased potatoes, you know, in the kind that for planting. And I'm
Mhm.
looking at these and I'm thinking, well, they're sprouting. They'll grow potatoes. We'll see if they're like little teeny tiny things or I don't know if they modify potatoes or not, but we'll find out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing, Annie. I think that we can maybe continue the conversation with Annie. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just share again. Can you see here, Annie Baker? And please take a minute to introduce yourself. No rush there. I don't know. I don't have any specific slides on the market, but yeah, take it away.
Cool. Hi, I'm also Annie. I'm in Prescott, Arizona, and I work for Prescott Farmers Market and an organization called Prescott Community Compost. The market's super cool. It's a great community spot, and that's where we do all of our drop-offs. So we have community members bring us their food scraps. And then we process all of that material the next day with a crew of volunteers, as you can see in this photo. So we've got our totes that we've collected scraps in and our green buckets. And then we mix it up, chop it, pile it, move it. The volunteers are so instrumental. And we get a good amount of scraps and we do it all by hand. And that was intentional because the time that you sit there and chop and work, you end up chatting with people and making connections that you may not have made without this opportunity. So we also collect scraps from a food bank, and we used to do some restaurant pickups, but hauling is a different monster. So we just do the food bank, and you can kind of see Sharon in this photo on my right, chopping a whole bunch of peppers. And the food bank gets a lot of grocery store or surplus material donated to them, and then if it doesn't get distributed by the time we pick it up, because they close for a couple days, they'll just put it in the compost bins. And so that is our number one source of kind of looking in there and being like, why is this here? Like, this is edible. So if it's not super good looking for people, I have a good handful of friends who have chickens and goats and sheep and pigs, and they're like so psyched to take these scraps. I think we can go to the next one.
Here you go.
So you can kind of see some of these, like you said, onions, onions, onions. We've got greens. When they're all mixed in a tote with some questionable things, that's when we kind of give it to the chickens, but we'll often find golden totes, gems of totes, where we can pick out the good things. So recently I grabbed some sweet potatoes, which I was about to purchase at the store, so I was so psyched. Chopped those up and cooked them for myself. Easy peasy. One of my favorite, I didn't have any pictures of this, unfortunately, but one of my favorite memories of going to the food bank to grab their inedible food scraps for compost totes. We hit the jackpot of beautiful bananas and mangoes. And so we borrowed a dehydrator. I say we, my coworker and friend. We borrowed a dehydrator from another friend and we chopped them all up, set them out on the trays. There was so many bananas, and the mangoes were delicious. And we were thinking that we'd store them for like hiking trips and adventures, but really we just kind of picked them off the dehydrator every time we'd pass by, and we didn't save too many, but they were delicious because dehydrating is one of the easiest ways, I feel like, to kind of preserve food, especially in a kind of hands-off way. I don't have a lot of kitchen space personally, so kind of keeping it for storage is great, and then it's an easy way to just preserve that food. Well, I do have access to a commercial kitchen through the farmers market. So we received a grant a while ago to build this community commercial kitchen to help mostly our vendors kind of prep the food that they need to and sell it. But Arizona has changed their cottage law and all that stuff. But we have this beautiful stainless steel kitchen. And so anytime that I have a huge load of something good that I want to process, I have that accessible to me, which is super cool. And it just makes me really excited to kind of get to the food bank before they even put it in the totes. Like, I'm like, if you're gonna get rid of this, why not just get rid of it to me before you put it with the moldy things? Like, separate it, and then I can do something with it, and it doesn't risk contamination for people who might not have as strong a stomach as myself. And I forgot to time myself, so just holler at me.
Oh, you're fine. You have like 30 more seconds or in an extra minute. You're good.
Cool. So this other photo is just the compost booth at the market, where we kind of touch base with everybody and we get to chat with them. And sometimes they'll come in and they'll be, because we weigh each bucket that comes in, and so they'll be like, oh, my bucket's super light today, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, don't be upset about that. That means you've potentially wasted less food. Like, don't think that you need to have a full heavy bucket of food scraps to be composting correctly. Like, we don't want you to have a lot of food waste. We want it to be utilized and turn those scraps into broth or something. And I think I have another slide. Do I? Oh, there you go. It's not waste until it's wasted. And so you can see some good things that people put in there. Sometimes somebody dumps a bucket and I'm like, okay, did you just want to have something to bring? Because those look like really good strawberries or whatever it is. And you can access me at Annie@PrescottFarmersMarket.org or compost@PrescottFarmersMarket.org. And yeah, so doing what we can with the capacity that I have to take the food that I see, that I can eat, and do something with that. But in the future, I'm really trying to work towards getting more of that and processing it on a larger, more official capacity. And Annie, I was super inspired by the like freezing the peppers. That's a good idea because it's so easy. Now you just kind of have them ready for meals. So I think that's about it for me.
Yanni, so many things. I was taking notes. So let's see who wants to comment on Annie's. Yeah.
How have the conversations gone where you're asking people to kind of like separate still edible things out versus, the stuff that is definitely compostable?
I haven't quite broached it yet.
Okay.
The food bank is an interesting one. They kind of run a tight ship, and sometimes asking things of them feels like a big deal. And they're in the middle of some remodeling, so I figured we'll wait for that. But it shouldn't be that hard if one of the staff members or a volunteer can go midweek and do a pickup, and then we can start processing before they sort of get bad. I think that would be ideal, but also just having them separate. It's also kind of subjective, right? Subjective, whichever one, because a brown banana to me is perfect. It's golden. It can do so many things. I don't like to eat green bananas, but if they see a spotty banana, they put the whole bunch in there. And so there's like this being okay with eating ugly produce and sharing ugly produce with people because it's actually still perfectly edible. Or like something that's a little bit bruised, especially apples, which you can cut around and then make an applesauce. So it's kind of like an educational aspect, even more than just asking them to kind of separate it.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't had any conversations like that, but it is kind of a, like you said, subjective thing where like something is still perfectly edible, but to a lot of people it does look like this is clearly garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's funny though, because as the tail end of the process, we see actually inedible food. Like we see actually rotting food that you wouldn't want to touch. And
Right.
some of this stuff, we're like, no, that looks so great. That's perfect.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, one of the things as far as inedible goes, or contamination or whatever, like both the grocery stores have, food grade kitchens in there, and they are producing cooking and stuff. And so we get a lot of eggshells. And the guy that works for us, he every once in a while he kind of gets on me about talking to those people and asking them to separate those eggshells and put them in a separate bucket. But I totally get what Annie's saying. It's like I really hesitate to go in and ask anything of them, because I appreciate what they're doing already.
Mhm.
And I'm sort of just like coming out as a person who eats like stuff out of the compost buckets. So I don't, maybe a year from now I'll be more comfortable and can get in there and just like, be an advocate for separating this stuff as they're composting it, so we have more clean food that can be eaten. Because lots of times I'll open it up and there'll be good stuff in there, but they threw eggshells on top. So that's
Yeah.
to me that's a no. If there's
Yeah, or protein. Yeah, it just takes some skin of a
one,
chicken or something.
we don't get any protein other than those eggshells. So
Eventually, that will build the courage, because the worst they can say is no. And the worst they can say is, that's weird, which.
Yeah, I empathize so much with this, as somebody that grew up in Michoacan, where there is just so much produce in los mercados and all of this. They're like big barrels for the pigs. So all of the stuff that is going bad, they just go to those barrels, and there are farmers that will take them. And I don't know where the conversation or the link was broken. If it was like, for example, in Ohio, that market next to the hostel where we were staying, I was just talking to the people in the diner and asking what about the food waste and blah blah. And they said also some of the presenters, I can remember, it's called Rusty. What's the name of the Ohio heroes? Rusty.
Rust Belt Riders?
Yes, the
Yeah.
Rusty Riders, saying that they are in conversations, but sometimes they're hesitant to push, like Annie was saying, more than what they're doing recovering after COVID. But they are in conversations, and some of them do want to compost, and sometimes it goes to the fact of giving them the right receptacles so that they don't have to think about that. So if the the composters at the market provide an additional bucket for rescue food, to put it right there with a sign clearage that it makes it easy on them, then they can think about this. And then sometimes it's also just about starting the conversation, because one of those farmers may have chickens that will be willing to take the scraps from the other one, but they don't have the time to think through and connect the dots and have the food grade 5-gallon bucket, and then making those flow connections is like an opportunity. Let's just say there is a lot of potential there. So I do understand that that's like an additional layer of complexity. Like Annie was just sharing with us how in a day where weather might be a challenge, or at the end of the day, and let me just go again to that farmer and say, remember, next week you can bring an extra bucket for the chickens. Sometimes it's just like one ball on the circus falls down, right?
Mhm. Yeah. That's a really good point, though. I mean, kind of parsing that out, something that might be like the food use hierarchy. If you think of that thing, animal feed comes below it being used for human feed, but it might be a good way to kind of bridge that gap between something that is, the subjective part in our minds of something that is definitely not edible versus something that, a bruised banana or a bruised apple or a brown banana that I think a lot more people would take something like that and, say, oh, we can feed this to animals versus to humans. And it might be like a easy way or a very digestible way for people to kind of start separating out those things that are still good enough to eat.
Gracias, Julie. And I think another way that I've seen it solved is that in a market where there is let's say this case of Annie, where there is eggshells, you don't need to change the flow of everybody, but maybe the guy of eggshells can get you can provide that own container just for eggshells and say, you know what, this is an excellent sort of calcium, and we can have it separated. And so if that's the only protein, then it will be much easier to pull things out of everybody else if you just like isolate the protein. Just a thought. But that's why I love that you're here today on a Saturday, because brainstorming as we're all like doing the work and in different parts of the world is just hard. So if you're ready for our next presenter, I think it was Francisco who is really struggling coming back in and out. But I do have Tim here, and he has a story to share from Nueva Zelanda, where it's already Sunday. Would you like to introduce yourself and share some, Tim?
Sure. Thank you for having me. And yeah, kia ora from Aotearoa from New Zealand. It is Sunday morning over here. It's a beautiful morning. So there's a few different organizations that I represent and that I'm involved with. I think for the context of this call, most importantly, the Aotearoa Composters Network, which is an equivalent, a national community composters network, equivalent to the coalition over within the ILSR. My work is mostly through the Carbon Cycle compost company, which installs compost systems all over the country, and most of those are in schools, in marae, which might translate as like indigenous meeting houses for you guys up in North America, in businesses and stadiums and airports and things as well, malls. So I've had the absolute pleasure, especially in schools, of seeing the beginnings of composting in the context of food growing, especially, right? School gardens and things. Now, often, like literally every week, this week, I, for example, installed a compost system into a small rural school, which is funded. That's not a given in New Zealand, but is funded to have their lunches given to the students of that school. That only happens for schools of socioeconomic context which can't afford that, right? That's not a given yet. Now, food waste happens a lot in those contexts, especially when the food that's made is not pretty, right? It's it can be really not that fun. So it's a real delight to be installing compost systems in those places, but it's also, there's a little bit of sadness there. Yeah, that sometimes the food is that's provided to these kids and effectively these families is not that great, and then a lot of it ends up in compost, right? So there's a healing there that's really beautiful, that some of that food scraps is turned into compost, and they're growing their food there, right? So a part of that cycle is being repaired and connecting kids with growing strawberries. They were so excited. Things like zucchinis, they grew zucchinis and made them into these most beautiful savory muffins for us with their cooking class. So those kinds of things are what really excite me and connect me with this. But to tell a little story about food waste being prevented and the social aspect, I think I'll just touch on one that happened a few weeks ago. And this brings up some really interesting points about what you guys call food banks, I think. Mm-hmm. So we were installing a small compost system. It had the capacity of maybe, trying to convert this into yards and things for you guys, maybe 2 cubic yards. I think that sounds about right. Like 3 foot by 3 foot times 2. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really a dinky little compost system, but they have great aspirations in this particular food bank slash meeting house in a not so well off area in Auckland. And we went there to install it and to do a workshop and work, you know, and help people with how composting works, just the technicals, the greens and browns and water and air and stuff, get them excited about it. And alongside this was a pallet of pineapples, still in their boxes, right. So in each of the boxes there was a dozen pineapples, so there was probably hundreds of pineapples that were perfectly fine, that were that were sitting there. And this lady who was the coordinator for this particular food bank was describing some of the issues of these peaks and troughs of particular foods that arrive, and trying to share it with her community, but then obviously some of it just going bad before that can even happen, right? Getting so bad that it really is inedible. Now I don't know what happened with all of those pineapples, but she insisted you have to take some of these pineapples away with you after this workshop. There's no you cannot leave here without taking some of them.
What were they good still, or were they rotten?
Oh yeah, they were fine. And clearly we knew as well that as hard as she will work to make sure that all of those pineapples go out to the community, that was only one of the 2 pallets that she had. The other one was not next to the compost system; it was around next to the kitchen. So that, but the image in my mind was obviously that this pallet almost dwarfed the size of the compost system itself, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Plus, let me just interrupt you for a few seconds. You know, I just keep thinking pineapples was like this high-end commodity, more than the equivalent of $1,000 a couple hundred years ago. It was like
Right.
a status thing, and it
Yeah.
takes more to grow than a baby. And
Yeah,
they're just there for not being eaten. Yeah.
Yeah, I was fortunate once to see a small pineapple growing space, and it blew my mind as well how much space is taken up by each pineapple and how much time. So anyway, she insisted, and my colleague said, oh yeah, okay, we'll take, yeah, exactly, dehydrated. We'll take oh sorry, he said I'll take 3, right? And I'm thinking, okay. And she goes, yeah, sure, and goes and grabs 3 of the packets, so 3 dozen. And he's like, oh gosh, I can't, right? I can't take that. And I said, no, that's fine. I'll take. Oh, hello. Sorry, this is my son William.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take 3 of those packets. And the rest of the story is really more of a story of the connection that happens through that, right? It's not that yes, those pineapples were eventually eaten, but the point I think was that evening, you know, the pressure was on for me to make sure these pineapples went into fridges, right? Because they would just continue to ripen otherwise and go bad. So that had me out on the street in my new local neighborhood, right? I've just recently shifted into a place that has a whole lot of social housing and things like that. So I'm out on the streets, just meeting people who I wouldn't otherwise meet. Talking to people who right, handing out these things that, as you say, used to be these status symbols of dining. Trying to make sure that these pineapples were eaten, and the conversations that occurred and the connections that have already been fostered just through that particular situation, I think is a piece that I would like to add to the story, rather than a recipe. I love all of the recipes and the ideas for all of the food, but I just wanted to additionally highlight those opportunities to give away and to connect with community through food, whether or not it's going to be wasted. So kia ora, and thank you again, Daniela, for the opportunity to connect over this.
Thank you so much, team. I'll open the floor. I have like 5 different comments, but I don't think I want to take all the space. Who wants to comment on team?
The surplus food is just insane. We had there's like a food hauler who comes, gets a lot of stuff from farms before it even reaches stores. And it's just surplus. The stores don't want it. It's never been to a restaurant. It's in the packages that it was put in from the farm. And he comes by and he's like, I have like 5 pallets of tomatoes. Do you want them? I was like, 5? We're small, we're bigger than 2 cubic yards, but 5 pallets? And
Yeah,
so
like
it's kind of insane.
how much can you really process?
Yeah.
Because we have different capacities.
Yeah. And he was saying how he had already put out a call to livestock owners, like ranchers, people with animals, and they had taken, I think initially there were like 12 pallets, and each pallet has 100 boxes with
Yeah.
35 tomatoes. So he tried to distribute it to animals, to people who could eat it, the edible ones. It's just so wild how much food. And I'm like, what about people? They're hungry people. It's just hard for them. Like, what's a food bank going to do with that many tomatoes?
Yeah.
I would love to see spots in food banks for processing. Like somebody's job is to get those tomatoes into a sauce or a can or dehydrated or sun-dried,
So have the infrastructure. I'm hearing you saying having the capacity and having the staff, whether it's volunteers or because it also takes resources. All of these national efforts to do grants for like cold storage, that also you need to pay for the utilities. It's a puzzle that we're all part of, right? But I just feel honored that all of you that are through the day by day compost, like you have a special lens. And so with not longer delay, I'm gonna pass it to Julie. Because Julie, we didn't have time to share the slides that I just dropped like together in the last 20 minutes for you. But I'm just gonna share, if you don't mind, before you start, a couple of photos. Well, Francisco's not here yet, so I'm just gonna forward. This is Julie. In the fellowship program that I was honored to be part of with Compost Crew. This is the operation that she runs on the back, and this was my last day of the fellowship with you, Julie. And these are just some of the photos from that day, that fellowship that I just took the liberty of adding here for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally missed the memo about the photos, so thank you for having my back.
So take it away, Julie. This was not from there, so I'll just take stop the sharing so that you can share with us what
those photos are
what's on your
perfect.
mind.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Julie. I work at Compost Crew. I know some of you. I've worked there for it'll be 4 years this August, and since starting there was kind of my very first foray into commercial composting. I'd done my own composting at home for years before that, and I started in August and kind of got through the hot summer of all of that. And our company does curbside collection of post-consumer food waste from households, and then also from commercial restaurants and other food producers. And when it's coming in these buckets and in the heat of the summer, everything looks pretty much the same initially, especially as you're kind of getting used to a new workflow and all of that. And then you rapidly come up to, after the end of summer, up to some very big eating holidays for the Americans. And I remember my first Thanksgiving, the week after Thanksgiving, when we had our first pickup, and the sheer amount of perfectly good wasted food in the pile was so disheartening. And because intellectually I know the statistics about food waste and how much people eat on these holidays and how much of it goes to waste, but then when you're standing there at this pile of I think probably close to 800 households worth of holiday food waste and looking at all of this perfectly edible food, and it very much put it in a different perspective for me, and kind of, you know, changed a lot of my feelings around celebrations that involve food. And since then, you know, Thanksgiving being its own separate conversation, but just kind of since then, it's kind of reframed how personally I celebrate, you know, holidays like that, like holidays that are kind of centered around eating and food and gathering and community. And so there's so many opportunities for rescuing food. And I think we kind of touched upon it a little bit in the last conversation about like the community surrounding that, and how it can be difficult to find the people that are willing to take like your 20 pounds of rescued onions that probably have coffee grounds stuck to them, or, you know, your pineapples that are a little squishy. And that's been kind of a difficult one for me to crack, you know, within the scope of the way our business runs. But kind of building those connections like a little bit more organically with like my, you know, my friends and my family and the people that I talk to. And you know, I think a lot of those things kind of spread by word of mouth more than anything else, at least in my experience. But yeah, so now we've made kind of this concerted effort to, especially for the places that we get food scraps before they get mixed with the rest of what we get. Like when we're still getting like the good stuff from our, you know, farmers that are producers as well, and just pulling off as much of that as we can and sharing it with our coworkers, and, you know, going to things like this and talking to people about ways that you can use the food scraps, and then talking about it in the context of like holidays and celebrations. I mean, before it was Thanksgiving, it was a harvest festival, and it seems so wrong to celebrate a harvest by wasting everything. And so, you know, talking about what we can do with the food scraps, with the food after the holiday celebration, making stock, all the other things that you can do with them. And that's been something that we've put into some of the community events that we host. We do like a food scrap festival every year, and reducing the food waste is always a big component of that, because I want to get the really gross stuff. I don't want perfectly edible food coming across our paths. And so kind of starting those conversations surrounding holidays has been a push for us, just because it doesn't seem like a great way to celebrate.
For sure.
But yeah,
That makes me think, can I jump now?
go for it.
I could talk forever about this stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, after Halloween, we all get a bunch of pumpkins. And one of my volunteers, she's super cool. And she was picking out good looking pumpkins and baking them, pureeing them, and either saving them or eating them or making pie with them. And I was like, that is awesome. Like, hell yeah. Because they were great pumpkins. You know, some of them get a little funky once they've been carved, but there are so many different varieties. And it's another thing, like the Harvest Fest. We're celebrating fall and this abundance and these beautiful vegetables, fruits. I think they're fruits. And then we're just going to get rid of them as soon as we're done and not even think about trying to salvage them.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a pie baker on our team too, and there's like a whole pumpkin pie season that we celebrate.
Oh, that's awesome. I love pie.
But it takes time too, right? So then, and the limited life, like you understand why some of your customers, who in many occasions are paying customers, they rather put it with you than throwing it away. So there is like a delicate balance on
Very
this.
much so.
I hear Annie saying some of their customers almost like throwing things into the bucket to have something to bring, right? I remember right now my friend Janet is not here with us, but she was supposed to join the conversation. So Janet, as you're gonna be listening to the recording, she helps run a community composting in a garden in New York City, right in Manhattan. And there is a lady that buys a CSA, but she doesn't eat vegetables. She brings them to the compost, and my friend tells her, why are you bringing this perfectly good vegetables? And she says, oh, because I am supporting agriculture, I'm supporting the farmer, I care about local agriculture. But she doesn't eat it at all, but it hasn't occurred to her to donate it or to cook it or to pass it to a neighbor, because for whatever reason. And so, but she thought she was doing like a really good thing by paying for the CSA, right? So there are all these points that you all share about, you know, community, supply chain, overabundance, timing, that for me, if may I share a little bit, just started like my tipping point was helping on the drop-off locations in DC when they started taking the drop-off location. I was just one of those people that are receiving the compost, and as you are receiving from the same folks once a week, you develop a relationship, right? You know them by name, and then you get to know what they kind of throw away. And you know, like from being from Mexico, I'm like, with all those pineapple rings, you could make a tepache, you could make it, or like Annie was saying with the raspberries, with the strawberries. Did you know that if you like frozen those into smoothies, those leaves are perfectly fine as part of your smoothie? There's just so many things that I feel like it was in my intrinsic nature to try to spread the love for food, but also into like I don't know, this might sound corny, but it seemed like a natural segue to mindfulness. I just thought that the communication points of talking to these folks, which we all will agree that are already like in the curve of innovation, much better than the average American. They are already trying because they're composting, but I feel like it's in all of us nature to try to bring it up in that pyramid, right? Just like a notch up. And so for that reason, I really wanted to hear from you all. I don't know if you have a specific percentage that you would like to share that you might eyeball it within, you know, Annie and both Annies have like I feel like Annie Nichols has the smallest scale, and then Annie Baker, the market, and then Julie has like the biggest one. If you have any insights of what's the percentages that you see of perfectly good food, I would love to hear that from you. And then let's continue this conversation maybe in the next forum, or maybe through this recording. I would love to see from our other friends that are doing composting, what are the things that they've done with the niche of clients or participants of their compost to elevate this mindfulness, right? If it's like an educational campaign, because some of them have told me, well, we don't want to lose our clients, but most of them are not like that. Most of them say, I want them to be able to embrace this pumpkin and actually make a soup, right? So could you share some of that? I know we're about to like hit the 10 minutes before, so if you want to do like a round of maybe your comments on that end of how you want this conversation to continue, and then maybe I'd like to see if Brenda and Francesca, who are also with us, want to like chime in a little bit.
We could popcorn it. I feel like good food is maybe 30%. 30% edible or could have been edible. And then probably something like 50 could be fed to animals. And so sometimes because we have a smaller operation, we get to make contact with each person who's kind of dropping off. We can be like, oh, hey, did you know that this, like the carrot tops make great pesto, or that can go for stock. Or some people, when they're cleaning out their cabinets, they'll bring things in packages. And they're like, I wanted to make sure that this was okay to put in the compost. And I'm like, oh, why are you getting rid of it? They're like, well, it expired 2 months ago. I'm like, I'll take that for you. Just so you know, sometimes these are suggestions that are very on the safe side, and you'll probably be okay. Everyone's different. Everyone has different risk comfort levels, but you know, just bringing it up and letting them know that like, hey, I do it and I'm kind of okay.
Just
Yeah,
kind
I
of.
think I'd agree with your percentages. From what I see in my operation, it's, seasonal. So definitely like around, holidays, I see an increase in the amount of good stuff that goes out. And then like kind of towards the end of like the summer boom growing season, big, it increases for sure. But yeah, 30% sounds about right. And yeah, 50% for animals for sure. We used to pull off some things for pigs at a local pig farm, but then we had to shut that down because there was rules about, USDA rules about trash feeding animals, and it needs to be separated beforehand. So, but that, that's been a difficult one for us to crack just because of the way our, pickups are kind of organized. We don't have a ton of face-to-face with our, customers on a day-to-day basis. And so like, we don't really have that, connection at the source for a lot of these. And so it's difficult to kind of crack that nut of peeling off things that could be, saved for animals or parsed out for people. All of our food scraps come in compostable plastic bags for good or for ill. And we definitely take the stuff that's still wrapped up in the bag that looks pretty good. So, or like a cabbage, it comes in its own package. You can just peel those leaves off and it's still great, but yeah, and then in terms of, the way we kind of communicate to customers on like a broader scale in terms of what they can, do with stuff, we always do. Our social media manager is amazing, and she, before and around holidays, she, sends out this litany of like, hey, you can make soup with the rest of that turkey, or here's an awesome recipe for your strawberry tops, or all this stuff. And so trying to reach people that way, and then through our food scrap festival and that kind of stuff. But that's, a little more organic. It doesn't have as much of a reach, but those face-to-face interactions I think are the most impactful. So finding a way to have more of those is a goal of ours for sure.
I'm just kind of amazed listening to all of you. So thank you for all your shares. And it made me realize something about what we do. So we get all of our food waste from 2 small grocery stores. One of them keeps all of the food waste in the cooler with the lids on. I mean, they put it in buckets and keep it in their walk-in cooler. So that stuff's in really good shape. I'd say 40% of it probably is edible. And we just don't get buckets of stuff that's, bad from that place. The other place it isn't refrigerated. And I would say that grocery store, maybe 10% of it that we get is stuff I can rescue and use. And when I'm listening to all of you share about all the different places your inputs come from, I'm realizing and seeing more clearly that I only have 2. We're composting a lot of coffee grounds, and that stuff's all clean. I mean, it can sit and it looks the same next week as it does this week, basically. Not so with food waste, but I can see that I do have a lot more ease and opportunity to look at what's coming in from those 2 places and engage with those people in there who are wonderful and nice people. So thanks for helping me see a little clearer what I'm doing. So thanks.
Thank you, Annie. Maybe partner with the food bank for small percentages or something. We'll talk some later. Tim.
I think the bit that really excites me about food waste that's ending up in compost in this conversation is that food those food scraps that need to be composted are separated out, obviously, from food that can be eaten, and then that's closely tied to the context in which that compost is used, right? So to grow food. So to open up rather than section down all of these different parts in the waste hierarchy, if you like, to open up the conversation to include all of the things: the food growing, the soil development, the nutrient density of that food, the composting of the food scraps that have to be or that can't be eaten, the diversion of food that can be eaten, right, to humans and to animals and things like that. The preservation of food, freezing and dehydrating and cooking and all of that sort of thing. To have the conversations that include all of those things in a microcosm and in communities, I think is one of the most powerful parts of this. Rather than trying to isolate them as separate issues, to embrace them as a food systems whole. Yeah, I think is really powerful for individuals. It allows for systemic thinking and systemic change.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, on that note, Tim, I just think that's so spot on. And we're really interested at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance at looking at whose pockets are lined. So, you know, we have, you know, I don't know if you're fighting dollar stores or whatnot in New Zealand, but the food system, the reason that egg prices are so high, yeah, sure, avian flu virus has something to do with an inflation, but the main reason is the corporate concentration in the grocery store market is driving prices. And so when it comes to food rescue, the infrastructure can be diverse and distributed and community-based with cold storage. You know, nobody would build one cold storage for a state or a country. It's going to be distributed, right, to help rescue that food. And I see so many alignment with community composting. Anyway, I see we're at the top of the hour. So back to you, Danielle. Isn't she amazing?
I'm just so grateful that you're all here. Let me just give a chance to Francesca to say hi because she's our storyteller listener. Hola, Francesca. You don't need to say anything, but we just wanted to acknowledge that you're here. So you're muted. Okay.
Zoom on the phone can be so tricky.
Okay, well, she's muted, but thank you for joining. Please, we'll send the recording to everyone that signed up. We had like 40 people signing up. I'll try to conclude. I know we're in the hour, but I hope you don't mind that we pass a couple more minutes. I just want to say the thank yous because, Tim, all the things you mentioned about the schools resonated with me so much. One of my biggest passion has been the schools. On average, when I go to the school, like in the back of the house, ting, 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 and measure the waste and separate it, it's at least on the schools here in the US that are like 400 to 600 students, at least 100 pounds per day that they're wasting. And this is food that is, as you said, often like part of the subsidies. Not to say that the subsidies need to be reduced, which they have recently, but that the education time sometimes needs to like broaden, right? Or the food selection matching the students, and just the system thinking, as you were mentioning. Sometimes the lunch time doesn't allow them enough time to even eat the food that is on their plate. So it's a system situation. And what I love about this meeting with all of you today is that, to my knowledge, in the Food Waste Prevention Week, we had, classes about composting or warm composting, but not one. This is the first one where hardcore composters are give us the back of the scene of all of those parts where awareness, as we mentioned, mindfulness can happen. So I feel like there'll be other people inspired by all the insights that you have shared here today. And for that, I'm just very grateful. I'll try to make like a little summary to also share in our social settings. And Brenda, thank you so much for being here. I just feel like this will not be the end of this conversation because you're here and we can bring it to another platform that way. I feel like all the work that you've all done, including Brenda, for decades in the aspect of compost, it's like our whole crowd of the compost community cultivating. It's the food waste prevention is part of it. So we took like the first step today, and for that, I'm just muchas gracias. And yeah, let me just say one last thing. I'm gonna share the slides with those participants and the contact information of all of us. If you wanna please follow also like the things that I might wanna be able to put out in the universe, like this one today, they're in Instagram in Regenerative Solutions. And that will be all. Thank you for your time. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
weekend.
Have a good weekend.
Mwah! Thank you.
Thank you.